why is being a creative so important?
Yeah, I feel like to not fulfill your purpose for me is a death of your spirit and your soul, because it's almost like you're wasting the reason why you were given life. And to I feel like when you don't live life in alignment with whether it is your desires or whatever you feel like your purpose is, you live a life of resistance against your existence.
Yes.
So that's, I feel like, a very miserable life, and that would be death to me, to just have a consistently miserable life that is against a desire or a purpose or a reason for living. But yeah, I feel like all my life I've felt as though when I create art, whatever form it is, I feel that buzz, like, oh my god, this is exactly what I was here to do, and it feels like the least resistance with anything I've ever done ever. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. Hi everyone, welcome to the second edition episode of Ttalkssss. I'm your host, Ttalkssss, and today I just want to welcome you all to the second episode. I just want to welcome my second guest, Hannah. She's a baddie, a poet, and also a really, really awesome friend. Just a bit of background on how we met, actually. I met Hannah at a poetry event, a poetry night that was hosted by The Rest of Us, an amazing organization highlighting Black creatives in Melbourne as well. So shout out to them. I'll let her take it from here and introduce herself and what she does.
Amazing. So I'm currently a student. I'm studying herbal medicine, and I am an artist and a poet, and I feel like I've always been, but it's only this year that I've been trying to say that out loud, which is a lot, but it's good because I feel like I've been actually stepping into myself. But yeah, I feel like that's what I'm trying to make happen now, like having my life be more centered around art and poetry and living out my purpose.
That's amazing. I love that. When you say purpose, I did actually read your bio, and I'm just going to paraphrase. I might not say it perfectly, but you did say to die would be to not fulfill my true purpose, which is to create, right?
Yeah.
I just want to know, why is creating so important to you, and why do you, when you say death, are you liking it to a spiritual death, the death of the soul, or are we talking about physical? Because that's a very, for me, it's like a beautiful statement that shows just how passionate you are. So I want to know, why is being a creative so important?
Yeah, I feel like to not fulfill your purpose for me is a death of your spirit and your soul, because it's almost like you're wasting the reason why you were given life. And I feel like when you don't live life in alignment with whether it is your desires or whatever you feel like your purpose is, you live a life of resistance against your existence.
Yes.
So that's, I feel like, a very miserable life, and that would be death to me, to just have a consistently miserable life that is against a desire or a purpose or a reason for living. But yeah, I feel like all my life I've felt as though when I create art, whatever form it is, I feel that buzz, like, oh my god, this is exactly what I was here to do, and it feels like the least resistance with anything I've ever done ever. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. So when you say, obviously a lot of us do experience that resistance, and for example, myself as well, before I started the podcast, I was thinking about all these what ifs, should I not, but I always knew in my soul, like, I enjoy speaking to people, I enjoy having conversations. Do you have any advice for anyone in getting over that resistance?
I feel like a lot of the time it's to do with shame or feeling alone when you want to pursue something, because everyone knows the feeling of when you are in your purpose, I would say. I think that we might have trouble like completely isolating it and going along with it, but I feel like once you do something and you're like, oh, this feels like I'm in like a flow state, I feel so good, and I feel like I'm learning things at like a crazy rate, I feel like that's like people know or would know after they feel that and I guess contemplate it, that that's like their purpose. But yeah, I think the like shame and isolation of sometimes being in your purpose is the hardest part, you know, because people say all the time like, oh, like you're so confident, or like, wow, like people, I really appreciate when people compliment me and I have this element of awe, but it is kind of lonely and it's difficult, you know, to choose resisting against all the other forces that aren't my authentic self or what the world perceives as, you know, more palatable, you know?
Absolutely. I think that's such a beautiful way to put it. It's definitely not an easy journey. And those are really some really good tips. I did just want to ask you, you said you've created other forms of art before, so it wasn't always poetry that you did, correct?
Yeah.
I was wondering, what did you always used to do beforehand? Or
So I feel like I've always drawn or painted, and I've done sculpture as well. It's always been like a form of creative outlet, and I only like realized that what I do was like poetry in high school. Like I just used to write things, and I still just like write things, whether it's my feelings or whatever. And I realized that it's in a like artistic or creative format, which I guess people call poetry, but they're all like hand in hand. Like I paint things and have poems that go with the paintings and vice versa, or even just any expression. Like it could be me dyeing my hair, it could be me wearing something. Like I feel like the words that follow when I create are all like synonymous, kind of. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. You talked about shame, and like I know it was before, but the role of shame in, obviously it raises your self-esteem, and then it obviously stifles your creativity. What do you think is the antidote to shame? Obviously, is it self-expression? Is it community? What has helped the most so that you leave that state and you start creating more?
I feel like community is a big one, and like pride in being proud of yourself. And I feel like to be proud of yourself, you need that support of community and other people, unfortunately, to validate that. Like, as much as it's nice to only focus on your own self-validation, it makes such a big difference when you're around people who support you and who are cheering you on for being your authentic self, you know? And I'm really grateful that, especially in the last couple of years, I've really tried to surround myself with people who are like me and who support me and who I support them, and I love what they do, you know? And yeah, I feel like that has really like stimulated my growth like a lot and made me a lot more comfortable in like all the ways that I express myself. Yeah.
Yes, that's so amazing. I love that we touch on the power of community, because everyone tries to make it seem like you don't need external validation. And yes, desiring external validation can be unhealthy when it's in obviously extreme amounts, but we all need that sense of validation where your community and the people around you can say, we love the work that you're doing, and they accept you for who you are. And that's obviously really important when you're around a negative community or community that encourages that inauthentic self. You always see yourself walking down that path of shame and just feeling like you can't be yourself. So I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. And touching on community, I love my running community, the running community I'm a part of. Shout out to her run, and my beautiful friend Amal for bringing all the most beautiful women together, the kindest, ambitious women. So I just want to shout them out. Is there any particular community or any of your friends who you just want to thank or who you feel gratitude for helping you in your journey?
I feel like I have a lot of gratitude for the African Astral Market, which happens at Vola Foods usually, and is run by Kemi and a bunch of the people down there. I feel like that really helped me access like more African community, because where I live, like I just didn't really have a lot, and especially like in school, like primary school and high school, like me and my brother were like the only people in the area, and I just never had that before. And so I feel like I want to thank the Astral Market and my friends who aren't African as well, because a lot of them are like Greek and Italian, and the thing that I have with them is that as much as they might not understand me at certain levels, they have always been there and always tried. And like when I went to the astral market, or when I go to African events, or whatever it is I do, they'll be there too, and they'll come just so I feel comfortable. So I don't want to cry. It's like I appreciate them so much because I feel like it's not always comfortable entering communities that you don't necessarily identify with. Like, they're not African, you know,
Yes.
but that's not the point. The point is that they appreciate community and want like that at every level, for me, for them, for everyone. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, shout out to friends who actually can support you without needing to center themselves. That their identity doesn't have to be African. They just support you because they love you and care about you.
Yeah.
And the Astral African Market is an amazing space. You'll meet a lot of great business owners there, and there's amazing food. So shout out to Astral African Market as well. I wanted to go on a different topic. Obviously, you said you grew up in your area being the only kids of African descent, or being mixed at your school? Sorry.
Yeah, well, at my school, there were only other African kids when I was in like year 10 or 11.
Wow.
And there was only like a couple.
So mostly you were around Anglo, Australian.
Yeah, it was mostly Middle Easterns in my area, and Asians. So and the rest were Australian. But it was just like interesting having that experience, and like having like my family has a bit of cultural trauma, so like I didn't really have weren't allowed to have a lot of African friends because of that. So I feel like that was another level of isolation, and I don't have a lot of African family here, so it was difficult in that way. Yeah,
definitely. And how do you feel like that impacted your formative years, or how did that impact your art, just to feel that sense of isolation at such a young age? Do you feel like it?
That's a great question.
Which pocket or
I feel like it's interesting because a lot of my art is centered around self-portraits, and like even with poetry, I would call it a self-portrait because it's about me and a reflection of myself. And it's interesting looking back at my self-portraits and how I was able to perceive myself, or what I would look like when I would draw a portrait compared to now. Whereas like now I feel like the likeness of myself in my art looks a lot more like me, and I draw a lot more figures that have Afrocentric features, you know. Whereas when I first started, I remember in year 7 or year 8, we drew a self-portrait, and the image that I drew was very Asian. And I am half Asian, but that's not exactly how I look.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's interesting to just see my reflections of how I've been in touch with myself, like how I feel connected with my blackness and my Africanness now, and it just comes out like as a channel, because I feel like my art is definitely a channel where you could see exactly where I'm at.
Yeah, that's amazing. Beautiful way to put it. It's almost like a portal, or the way that you show everyone else who you are, and it's amazing to see the development as you became more sure of your identity. Like you said, your artwork became a lot more centered on that. I just want to know, what's your ideal routine, or what's your routine like as a creative? I know some people like to take long walks, or they sit in certain spaces.
I feel like, unfortunately, my art happens a lot out of necessity. So, and unfortunately when I have a negative emotions, or when I go through things, the first thing that I go to is my art, which I'm grateful for, because I feel like it is the most fortunate vice, you know. So I feel like when I am in distress is when I'm painting or writing, when I feel depressed, sad, anxious. So it's not the most like fluffy and happy, but I feel like especially in the last year and a half, I've been trying to focus on making art when I feel good, or when I feel neutral. and be able to produce it like that and not just have it as a coping mechanism. So yeah, it's like in context of poetry, I feel like the first time that I did read stuff and the last couple of times I've been able to sort of set free all those traumatic type of creations because I've been able to speak them out loud where I've never really spoken them before, and now I like after the last poetry thing I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna write now? Like all my trauma is gone.
Do you feel like you form an identity around your trauma in your artwork, or do you feel like because you were so focused on the negative or those memories that you felt like there was nothing left more to explore, and then you realized?
I feel like all of the traumatic poetry and art set me free. So it's never stagnant, but I think it made me realize like, oh, I can write things about joy. Like I'm not actively going through anything extremely difficult. Like I still have things about my difficulties that I write, but maybe it is time for me to move on to a more lighter, or even be able to observe at a lighter frequency.
Yes.
You know. Yeah, so it was just like an interesting freedom of being like, wow, I'm like not shackled, not like directly shackled, but I don't feel this weight anymore.
Yeah.
Now I can like look up almost. Yeah.
No, that's beautiful, and I think what I've seen in the art world or observed personally is that people who make that sort of art that's looked at as the focuses on darker emotions or the more repressed emotion, the depression, sadness, it's almost looked at as more worthy than when you make art focusing on joy or just the lighter frequencies. Do you feel like that's true to some extent? Do you see that, or do you feel like people do value
I feel like I've observed that people like lighter art naturally. I feel like when you see something that's pretty, people are drawn to it. I feel like that's been my like general perspective, and I feel like that's part of why maybe I hadn't shared my darker things earlier on.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I've always believed with art in general, but also with darker art, is that like emotions and things that people experience are universal. And like whether or not you like it, if you connect with something dark, it's because it's in you. And that you've experienced it, or it's something that you will experience. And that's not a negative thing, and I think people generally can be afraid of the darkness and going into a space that's not super comfortable. But I feel like it's extremely liberating, and that some people really appreciate that, and I think especially with like the poetry space was where I was like, wow, like this is where it's appreciated. You know, like I never thought that everyone would be like, wow, this is so good. I'm like, oh, like this is about my breakup.
And you're like, oh, you enjoying this? Okay.
Yeah, because it's a universal thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, it makes you feel so much less alone. For
That's
sure.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think also when you do say that, I think you're basically that type of artwork liberates you. You think you're freeing yourself by repressing your emotions and pretending you're okay, but that's actually worse for you in the long run. It sort of comes back to the idea of the shadow self, right? And integrating that in your artwork. is that similar to what you're saying? So my question for you is, how do you acknowledge and obviously show love to the parts of yourself that are not always like, the parts of ourselves that are not always aesthetically pleasing, those emotions that they're not the prettiest, anger, sadness, maybe just irritability, etc. But how do you also hold yourself accountable? It's like a fine balance.
I feel like today is a good example because like I was so excited when I was getting ready, and like it was so early in the day, but I was just so excited, and I was like, I want to capture this excitement. So I took a video of myself dancing, and I thought about it a lot. Like we all think about when we post things a lot. I think a lot about it, but I was like, nah, I'm taking the video. I'm just gonna, crop it a little bit, post it. I thought about it after. I'm like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. But the big point was that I was like, I feel this, I want to do this, I'm gonna do it.
Yes.
And it's also in a very non-extreme realm, where it's like I feel like I need to, and generally that people should really allow themselves to just like do things because, and that like I can look however I want because, and I can wear a crop top because, you know, things that are very sometimes sensitive to me or to other people, where like I worry about my stomach, I worry about like the perceptions of other people. I'm like, oh, I don't look like this or I don't look like that, and there are so many secondary, third and fourth thoughts that happen.
Yeah.
Where I feel like just going with that intuitive, how do I feel, I should push myself to just go with how I feel initially. Yeah.
I love that. I think it's the role of your instincts in making art is so beautiful. I think we get so used to pushing our instincts back and always doing what is going to look right, and it takes such a long time of unlearning, right, to get to that level. And it sounds like your artwork has played a huge role in that. Would you say?
For sure, it really has, and it just reconfirms the freedom and the positive like path that I'm on, and that like this is my purpose, because I feel like I've said before to friends that to me art is like God. Like I've always seen whenever there's like a verse that's like we're made in the likeness of God, and I remember the first time I heard that, I initially thought like God is a creator, I'm a creator, and everybody is a creator in so many ways. And I feel like whenever I create art, whatever it is that I do, I'm instantly taught so much, you know. I feel like I'm getting lost from the question, what the question was.
No, that was really beautifully answered. My question was regarding the instincts, the fact that artwork helps you follow your instincts in a more natural way. When you said you get in a state of flow, I think a state of flow, if we're really defining it, is acting upon your instincts in the most instantaneous way. It almost comes second nature to you, that you are flowing, that you are creating. And I think we're taught to block off our instincts in favor of other people's opinions, in favor of what's looked at as normal in society. And unlearning that can be really hard, but artwork plays such a huge role. So I think you answered it beautifully when you were just... Yeah.
I think like at the end of the day, when you reflect back, like when I reflect back on following my instincts now, and like the costs you feel so much more anxious, and you feel so much worse not following them and following whatever it is everyone else says. And like as much as it's hard to like surpass like blocking out other people's voices and putting your instincts first, as much as that's difficult, it is worth the suffering, because at the end the liberation is so much greater.
Wow.
Yeah.
let me just sit with that for a moment, because that's actually such amazing advice, and it's a word. So I'm just marinating, I'm sitting with it, because I think we think the short-term gains for denying your instincts or following the path that everyone else is following are so good. You think it's going to grant you what you want, and then you realize you lose out on a lot at the end. I think a lot of people's biggest regrets in life can be said as, I wish I made that decision to travel across the country. I wish I was brave enough to follow my dreams, or brave enough to make the decision I know would have taken me forward in life, even if it was hard temporarily. So yeah,
my psychologist said to me last week, she said, choose your hard. Which I love, because she said it was about relationships and like the dating scene, because I'm suffering. I'm suffering up here. But essentially it was, choose your hard. You could choose to be with anyone. And like, let's say the person, like I was just going on a date, I could choose to be with that person, they're not that great, and suffer in a horrible relationship because we're not that compatible and they're not that good. Or I could choose the hard of, I'm gonna wait, you know, I might feel lonely every now and then, and it's hard, but this hard is so much better than the hard on the parallel side of being with someone that you're not compatible with. Like I've done that. I think a lot of us have done that. And I was like, wow, like you can use that on so many levels, choosing your hard. You can choose to listen to other people's voices, and that's hard. Or choose to listen to your own, which is still hard. But it's the better of the two. it's the better of the two.
Psychologist came through with a word.